Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms, my name is Stuart, and welcome to another Epic Battles Waterloo painting tutorial. So these miniatures are under 15mm, they're 13.5mm to the eye, and this is Prussian line infantry. It's taken me a little while to get around to these, but I'm finally here. So as you can see, the miniatures are prepared in a sort of fairly heavy zenithal pre-highlight. So it's a black prime and a dusting almost top down using white with an airbrush, and then I've dry brushed as well to pick out some more details, and that's because I base coat using contrast paint, and it cuts out some stages in terms of highlights and shade, even though I'll add more later. If you want more information on how to do a zenithal highlight, I'll pop a little link in the video now. So first up, we're going to start with the flesh, and we're going to start with some contrast dark oath flesh. And this will pick out the flesh on the faces and the hands really nicely over that heavy zenithal pre-highlight. I want to make sure that there wasn't too much shadow on the face and hands areas in order to get the best effect from this. What it means is you don't really need to do any further highlighting afterwards, though I do tend to do a little bit just to pick out certain areas. So next up I'm going to do the hair. I like to use three colours for this just to give a bit of variation. So I use contrast Wildwood, contrast Nasdrag Yellow, and contrast Gore Grunt of Fur. I open up all three pots, have a clean brush there, and just kind of work my way down the row of men. So next up, I'm still using Gore Grunt of Fur here, and I'm going to be picking out the stocks of the weapons, of the muskets, and also the backpacks themselves. Now onto some contrast Basilicanium Grey, and this is going to be for the trousers and also the bedrolls or blankets that they have tied around their midriffs and over their shoulder. So next up, it's over to an Army Painter speed paint, and this is Cloudburst Blue, and this will form the basis of all of their jackets. And there's not an awful lot on show in many ways. You've got a little bit around the arms, you've got some areas around the bottoms of the jackets as well, a little bit on the shoulders and things, but you do find you're picking out small areas with all the other equipment and things that are already there in place. One thing to be aware of with Army Painter Speed Paint, it can reactivate when you apply moisture again over the top. Some colours do bleed into others. This blue I don't find have any problems highlighting over the top of it at all, but until you've highlighted over the top and maybe varnished afterwards, you want to be careful that you might not rub it off or get a little bit of water or something on there, because you may well find that it comes off. Now we're going to do all the black areas. We've got the shakos themselves, we've got the boots, you've got the ammunition pouch, you've got the scabbard for the sword or the bayonet as well. So again, it's going to take a little while to go around and work on all of those. I'm going to be using contrast Black Templar, which is one of the two blacks that the Citadel Contrast do. This one I find has got more of a bluish tinge to it, which looks quite nice for leather and things like that. And it also provides the most natural highlight without having to highlight afterwards, even though we will do a little bit on these models. So now it's time for the first metallic paint, and we're working on the musket. So pretty much painting down the whole front. Make sure you get the bayonets, and there's two little barrel bands that are on the back of the musket as well that you want to pick out. And I'm using scale 75 black metal for this. Now also on the muskets, these have a little bit of gold as well. There's an extra little plate there on the back which you need to paint in gold, and also on the scabbard as well. I'm using a scale 75 Necro Gold for that. Now some other weapons, though, those of you who follow the French and British, there may have been gold or other colours on some of those as well, but these miniatures are quite plain. They don't have the brass plates on the front of the shakos and things like that. So just the excuse to add a little bit of extra colour here, where you really could leave this off if you wanted to, but I decided to go for it because it just adds that little bit of extra interest. But now we've reached the point where we have done a full base coat in contrast and metallic over the whole miniature, and you absolutely could leave this here. I say this on all of these, but I like to talk about this as a bit of a hop-off point for people who are looking to get still nice tabletop armies. The stages after this will highlight some of those areas and just make them pop a little bit further. Now for the first highlight, it's going to be on the blue on the jackets. I'm using model colour dark Prussian blue. Now you can skip this really and go straight to the next highlight if you want to. There's very little blue showing here, but what I've just used it to do is in certain spots, if the looks a little bit weak in the darker areas, I've just used it to sort of add that little bit of shadow. But yeah, this is definitely something that you could leave out on this miniature if you're looking to speed things up a little bit. I'm looking to not really pick out where the natural highlight from the contrast paint is, or sorry, the army paint or speed paint is, because that defeats the object a little bit. But occasionally there's just a little area where it's not dark enough in the shadow. I'm just reinforcing that with this colour, but it is very similar to the contrast the army painter cloudburst blue speed paint. Now we have the sort of the more popping highlight, and this is also model colour, and this is just standard Prussian blue, and this is the bit you could skip to without doing the previous stage if you wanted to. Now this one I think is a little bit more important in terms of if you really want to sort of make this as a bit more of an eye-catching tabletop paint job. But again, like I said, you don't have to do it, but I think it's a nice pleasing effect, and it just really makes the miniatures stand out. Now onto that flesh I mentioned earlier. You don't have to highlight the flesh on these miniatures. It's very small, and the contrast does a great job of it. But I decided I want to. And you'll notice I've shown two colours there. I really like using the Noctura range from Vallejo, but it's quite hard to get hold of. So quite often I'm using Fairy Flesh from Noctura, but if you can't get hold of it, model colour basic flesh is a really good substitution. I know when I run out of my Noctura paint, I'll probably move over to this because it's just a pain in the bum to get hold of. Now sometimes, once you do highlights and things, it can look a little bit bright and you want to just add a little bit of shadow back in. And I'm using a slightly lighter contrast flesh here. This is the Guilliman flesh, which I was using on many of my earlier tutorials. I'm just putting a very faint area back in around the cuffs of the hands and things, if I feel that my highlight has just made it a little bit too bright. Again, this is fiddling around with it. Very much a optional stage, a way of kind of finalizing it a little bit. You don't need to do it. Now I'm going to be using some scale colour graphite grey, and this is to highlight the black areas. Now, if you've watched the British and French tutorials, I haven't actually highlighted the shakos or the boots or anything like that, because the contrast paint does give that natural highlight anyway, and there's so much else going on the miniature. It was an area I left as a bit of a time saver because you just didn't need to do it. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the tutorial, these miniatures are a lot plainer. There's no shako badges, there's no sort of lace or anything like that on the shakos at all, so they are quite plain. To just reinforce that natural highlight that the contrast paint has given us, I'm just going in there with this grey just to pick it out a little bit. So just the lines on the top of the shakos, a little bit on the peaks, maybe odd line here or there. Add as much or as little as you feel correct. You can also add some to the boots as well, which I did a little bit here just to give it a little bit more definition, more to the top of the boots than the bottom, because the bottom tends to get covered in weathering powders in the way I do my basing. Next up, some more scale colour, some more scale 75, and this is graphite grey. Now you can see it there from the old bottle, and I'm just using it to highlight the trousers a little bit. So thin slightly, just a few lines here and there, just to make those grey trousers pop a little bit. And I'll also do the same thing on that bedroll, on that sort of sleeping blanket or greatcoat, or I'm not sure what it is. It might be a greatcoat. That's wrapped around the infantrymen themselves. Sorry, not much of an expert on the Prussian army, and it shows sometimes. So now we have some white areas to highlight. So we're picking out the cuffs and the epaulets on the shoulders, also the white strapping and a little bit of white around that's there to the top of the scabbard. Now your facings are obviously dependent on your regiment that you choose, so do check that before. Some will be red, some will be yellow, depending on what regiment you're going for. I've picked white here because I didn't want to do the same as I did for the Landwehr for the Silesians. Now I'm using model colour off-white. Seems to be my go-to. I'm a big fan of model colour. Whites, they seem to thin very nicely, aren't too chalky, and go on quite smooth. Now to highlight those metal areas, I'm using Game Air Silver, my go-to sort of shiny silver. It's lovely, it's out the bottle on a brush. I prefer the Air colours or the Scale 75 metallics if possible, which are designed to go through airbrush or brush. I just prefer the thinner metallics, as long as it's thick enough to be able to control and paint with a brush. I find them much easier to use, and they don't tend to clog up quite as much, and you don't get that kind of chalky, grainy effect. And that's it. That's them finished. So all based there. I'm not going through my basing techniques in this video. If you'd like to ask me, ask me in the comments and I'll take you through it. I think I did on the second British infantry tutorial, talk about a little bit about how I go around doing it. But I'm pretty happy with the way they come out. It's heavily contrast based as normal, but with highlighting afterwards, which I think gives a very nice, pleasing effect on the tabletop. And it's somewhere in your kind of your middle time length. It's not going to be the quickest you could do if you sprayed with a coloured rattle can, etc., or flat colours, but you could also pick out a lot more detail and spend a lot more time if you so wished as well. So I think it's a fairly happy halfway house. If this is the first video you've come across by me, there are plenty of other painting tutorials on the channel, so please do check them out. In particular, the Epic range from Warlord Games. And there's British tutorials and French. There's some American Civil War tutorials and things as well. This range seems to be a bit of a favourite of mine, and I've produced lots of videos for it as well. So there's lots of unboxings and talking about my own projects and how I go about things. So if it's something you've come across because you're interested in getting into the game, please do check out my other content. And there's lots of other stuff on there as well. A lot of Flames of War on there at the moment. Also a 15mm kind of area of miniatures, but there's some bolt action and some Middle Earth. So do check the other things out. Thanks very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It definitely helps me out. Thanks very much. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.